Hi, everybody. I'm here with Tom Angote, our East Africa program manager. He's been quarantining with family members outside of the capital city of Nairobi, but he recently went into the city to deliver food supplies for the families served by Under the Same Tree there. So he's here to share with you a little bit about how coronavirus and the lockdown in Nairobi has impacted the families served by Under the Same Tree. So, Tom, what was your recent visit like, and how was Nairobi different from normal?
So when I got a chance to go to Nairobi, I had to pass through a roadblock, which is governed by the police. So nobody is allowed to pass there unless you have papers from the medics and the government too. So I was allowed to go to Nairobi. When I got to Nairobi, I was able to meet with some families because I was delivering food to them. And it's quite tricky because with the curfews that has been imposed by the government, which you have to be back in your houses by 7. So most people are usually back by 7 p.m. in their houses, and no movement is allowed. It was quite difficult for me to adapt to that time because here in Machakos, it's quite different because you are staying in rural area, but in Nairobi, it's in town, the estates. So the movements there are very restricted, and the police are moving around during the curfews, and also there are police choppers which are monitoring over the skies to view if there are people who are moving around.
Wow. So, how has the coronavirus and the lockdown affected the lives of the families served by Under the Same Tree in Nairobi?
Most of the families that we serve here in Nairobi are business oriented. They own their own businesses. Most of them, they sell second-hand clothes, second-hand shoes. They depend on their businesses of biddings, doing bidding, and also small hotels to make like tea to sell out, and French fries, such things. And since the government has ruled out that there is no gathering, like large meetings of people, there are those who do the second-hand clothing. They are not allowed to go and sell at the market. So all the markets of selling second-hand clothes are being closed down, and there is no importation of second-hand clothes in the country. That way, they say it will reduce the spread of coronavirus. So their businesses they close their businesses, and they don't have any other means of generating income. For those who are doing the hotel in the small restaurant, basically the hotel industry, the government gave the order of all hotels to be closed down. So right now there is no business of hotels or restaurants. If you're found by the government doing the businesses, you'll be taken to jail or forced quarantine. So 75% of our program members, they are not working right now because their businesses are locked down right now.
Right. So, if families can't earn money day to day doing their businesses, how does that affect their daily lives?
Since they don't have any other means of generating income, it has really affected their daily life because they have to pay rent, they have to buy food for their families, and they have also to, because the government has introduced internet learning for the students, they have to provide internet for their kids. They have to buy working materials for their kids to study on, but they are not able because they don't have any other source of income. And it makes them to go to their relatives or go to rural home, where they can get food from their grandparents or their parents so that they may survive.
Right. And that education for their kids still isn't free. They're having to pay for it.
Yes, because the government has introduced internet learning. The government doesn't pay anything, doesn't give anything to the families for them to do the internet services. So the parents themselves, they have to provide for everything, the internet, and you'll find most of our program members, they don't have access to laptops or the cybers, because the cybers have been locked to avoid, to bring in social distancing. So they are not able to have access to laptops or the smartphones. So it's hard for our children in the program to have access to the internet learning, to be able to meet the other students.
So can you describe a little bit what life is like in the slum areas of Nairobi, and why social distancing is much harder there than it might be in other parts of the world?
So in the slums, these people who are living in the slums, they depend on casual jobs. You can't like lock them out completely from in their houses and telling them not to go to work. The government here doesn't provide for the families. The government only tells them, you stick, you have to be in your houses, you have to wear a mask, you have to wash your hands, you have to use sanitizers, but the government doesn't provide those facilities. So those people who are living in the slums, it's very hard for them to be locked in their house, to be indoors, because they have to provide for their families, they have to pay rent. So they have to go out to get some money to feed their families. So it's very hard to separate them from being close to each other, the social distancing, because most of these families who are staying in the slum, they're used to be in close contact. So it's very hard to separate them.
Right. So for Under the Same Trees donors and supporters, what can they be doing right now to help the families survive this time and work on rebuilding in the future?
Right now, for the start, maybe pray for the families, because they are going through a very hard time. And secondly, in future, we hope to have the emergency funds, where such pandemic, when they occur, we can be able to pull some money from the emergency funds and donate to the families. Like instead of when the pandemic occurs, we start raising funds. And also for the supporters, these families need facilities for their kids to study, because if you find those families who are rich, they are able to provide for their children to do the internet learning, but for these families, they are not able. So they need facilities which they can use it for internet learning. And also these families, they need a business. Their businesses which they have, it's not like very stable for them to take them through these such pandemics. These families, you can't tell a family to like save for an emergency, because it's very hard for them to save for an emergency with the kind of business they are doing. So in future, maybe we can, if we have enough funds, we can be able to establish for them a very big kind of a business which they can rely on, instead of also relying on Under the Same Tree for emergency funds.
Yeah. So we want to thank everybody for their support during this time, for remembering these families on the other side of the world, and knowing that it's not just us here in the US that's being affected by the coronavirus and lockdown. It's really everybody around the world. So thank you for remembering the families served by Under the Same Tree, for helping us raise money to bring them extra food during this time because they're facing food insecurity more than they usually would be. And in the future, we're going to be sharing stories directly from the families that we serve in Nairobi about how this lockdown has affected their lives, their experiences, and you'll be hearing from them directly about ways in which you can support their families and help them survive this difficult time. I'm sure they also have encouraging words for you all as we're all going through a time that's difficult and challenging. And know that you are in their thoughts and prayers during this time. Be encouraged. And we just want to say thanks. We need your support now more than ever. So keep watching for updates, and we're going to be working to bring you those updates. So thanks, Tom. I'll talk to you soon.